This is Lisa Ruggiero. I am a staff assistant for the National Recycling Coalition. On behalf of the NRC, I'd like to welcome you to this webinar for our very valued state recycling organization affiliate, the Michigan Recycling Coalition. This webinar is entitled Spring into Recycling, March 4th. I will be providing some technical support for today's session. Please take a moment to observe your GoToWebinar control panel. Most of the functions are self-explanatory, but I'd like to draw your attention to the questions section on your control panel. During our session today, you will all be kept on mute to ensure audio quality and minimize background noise. Should you have a question, please type it into the GoToWebinar question dialog box. We will be holding all questions until the end of today's presentation to ensure that we end on time. Resources from today's webinar will be made available to you, including a recording of our session today on the Michigan Recycling Coalition website at michiganrecycles.org. Before we get started, I just do a quick sound check. We have several panelists here today. Karen O'Brien, are you there?
I'm here, thank you.
Great, Karen, we can hear you loud and clear. Elisa Seltzer?
I am here.
Great, thanks, Elisa. And Mike Sapo?
Good afternoon.
Wonderful, we can hear you, Mike. And how about Matt Violet?
Welcome, welcome all.
Okay, Matt, you sounded a little far away there, so just try and speak into your mic a little closer.
I am here.
Wonderful, that sounds great. Okay, and so without further ado, I will turn the program over to Elisa Seltzer.
Okay, I am Elisa, Emmett County Department of Public Works Director and longtime MRC member, and I'm really excited to welcome you all here today for our March 4th webinar. This is a really exciting time for recycling in Michigan, and we have several people presenting today, all of whom have been intimately involved with the DEQ stakeholder group and taking part in it, and what we have to share today is really what we have looking forward to the future. The very first thing that we will be sharing is a recorded video from DEQ Director Dan Wyant, and he will be sharing the state's recommendation and really the launch point for everything we have to talk about from there. After that, we will hear from Mike Sapo, giving the MRC's perspective on the DEQ's recommendations. And at that time, Matt Flechter, who's the recycling coordinator for the state, will be sharing the state's perspective in terms of a response. And then we will hear from Karen O'Brien, Executive Director of the MRC. And lastly, Matt Violet, Project Manager at Chef Container, will give a preview of part 2 of this session, which will take place at MRC's annual conference, April 29th through May 1st at the Ann Arbor Marriott Ypsilanti at Eagle Crest, and I encourage everyone to put that on your calendar. Thank you very much. So now we will move forward. I do want to forewarn you that the audio and visual might not line up perfectly. We did the best we could to get this arranged, but the message is important to hear, so please bear with us even if it is a little laggy in the translation.
I'm Dan Wyant, Director of the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality. Thanks for the opportunity to come and talk to you about recycling. I'm very excited about Governor Snyder's initiative on recycling. Know that the governor announced in his environmental and energy message the need to expand recycling in Michigan. I'm very excited about the $1 million that was put into the governor's budget to do that. We worked real hard, the Department of Environmental Quality, with stakeholder groups to develop a plan. And so I want to talk to you about that in just a bit today. Stakeholder groups from the waste haulers to the landfill operators to the bottlers and the retailers, environmental conservation groups, all the way to the Recycling Coalition, met to recognize the need and opportunity for recycling in Michigan. We know that we have a 15% recycling rate that puts us behind in our region, and we know other states on the coast are again expanding recycling dramatically. We want to expand recycling in Michigan for all the reasons. We know that our consumers want to do this, and we also know there's great market opportunities for the stuff that we throw away. In our stakeholder group, we've recognized great consensus around what we can do, and we want to get started immediately. So we have a plan. In that plan, these components are in place, and we'll move forward on those. One, metrics and measurement, so we can know where we are. And in that, we want to establish some pretty aggressive benchmarks and goals to advance recycling. Two, there was a lot of consensus, and with $1 million, we can do a couple of things that will help tremendously. One is an information campaign that will work through a public-private partnership to inform consumers about how and where and the value of recycling. At the same time, we think it's important to develop markets for what we recycle. We need to add value to the products that we throw away, and with that, there's tremendous jobs and economic opportunity for the state. The $1 million will also allow us to do local county planning, increase access, and then we want to put a governance system in place so we can ensure this collaboration and partnership with all the stakeholder groups to advance recycling beyond the $1 million and what we'll use it for going forward. It's a very exciting time in Michigan. I'm very encouraged. We at the Department of Environmental Quality will provide leadership on this issue. We see great opportunities, and we look forward to working with all of you to advance recycling opportunities for the state of Michigan.
Okay, well, as anticipated, we had a little lagging there, but I hope you're all able to hear clearly what Director Wyant had to say. I would now like to introduce Mike Sapo, General Manager of RASOC and long-serving Chairman of the MRC Policy Committee, who will provide the MRC's perspective on the DEQ's recommendation.
Thank you, Elisa. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Elisa, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. So I think many of you may know, in 2007, the state of Michigan adopted a new solid waste policy. And it was a policy that was built on the platform of sustainability, waste utilization, and recycling. Prior to the new state solid waste policy, there had been a lot of mediocre legislation introduced that often had to do with improving recycling. In many cases, sometimes recycling was an afterthought of legislation that maybe was more targeted at the import of waste from Canada, or has something to do with changes the bottle bill one way or the other, whether it's an expansion or elimination thereof. Following the 2007 solid waste policy adoption, there has been not a lot of effort in moving the policy forward, and I have to say that that's been despite some hard work by the MDEQ. There are folks within that organization that have tried to move policy forward, but it really, for a variety of reasons, hasn't been all that successful. So in 2010, after recognizing those situations, as well as the recognition that Michigan has consistently been underperforming compared to peer states, the Michigan Recycling Coalition began to work to make its voice heard. We engaged our membership, and we learned from their expertise and experiences. We also examined best practices around the country. And in doing so, we were able to identify the elements necessary to have a comprehensive and successful recycling program throughout Michigan. On your screen, you'll see some of the results of that effort. In the lower right-hand corner, you'll see a list of components. This was a list of components that was adopted in February of 2010 by the Michigan Recycling Coalition Board of Directors. These are elements that we identified as being necessary for us to have a comprehensive statewide recycling program. You'll even see some dollars attached to those. Those are estimates of cost to do those types of things that we found necessary. And those were based on our research, looking at best practices across the country, talking with leaders and program managers throughout the state, and then trying to come up with a Michigan version of a best-in-class program. Following that, in 2011, we issued a report called The State of Recycling in Michigan, A Way Forward. And that further defined the costs and benefits associated with establishing a best-in-class recycling program that is competitive with other high-performing states. And that's the framework we use for advocating policy and legislative initiatives to improve recycling in Michigan. More recently, we've played a role with many others in the statewide stakeholder conversation that you heard the director speak of. And that has helped move the issue forward. The proposals that are being discussed today are really the result of those conversations. Everybody, I think, that's on this call probably heard that the governor recently proposed his executive budget. And on the next slide, you'll see the language from that budget. It includes $1 million from the general fund for the DEQ budget for a recycling initiative. Karen, can you advance the screen? You'll notice in there, in this language, that it includes many of the things that we recommended, and I'll go over that in a little bit more detail in a moment. But essentially, we believe that this paragraph captures the essence of the first steps of what the MRC is recommended to move Michigan forward in terms of recycling. Now, one could look at this and say, well, we've got a $52.1 billion proposed state budget. $1 million really isn't a lot of money. And that may be true, but I think it's important to put this in some context. The $1 million may not seem like much given the scope of the needs that we have with regard to recycling, but it really should be viewed in the context that this is the first general fund dollars in probably 2 decades that have been proposed for recycling in this state. And it's also a significant portion of the new general fund dollars that are being proposed for the MDEQ budget. And so I'd suggest that probably represents a sea change in how recycling is being viewed at higher level policy circles within the state. And it's also important for us to remember that there is fierce competition for resources at the state level. And so we have to think of this not necessarily just $1 million, but $1 million that's an initial investment and part of a broader plan of action that's being developed by the MDEQ. And if we go to the next screen, we'll see sort of the outline of what the MDEQ was talking on the line, and after I'm done, he may be able to provide some additional information about what you see on the screen here, or correct me if I make any particular mistakes in describing this. But at a recent meeting, the director offered a document that was essentially the MDEQ's plan of action. It includes $1 million that the governor proposed in his executive budget, and that can go to support 3 full-time employees in programming to target specifically measurement, education, technical assistance, and leadership. There's also the opportunity to redirect about $250,000 from the Pollution Prevention Fund to be directly used for recycling and advancing recycling in the state. And then there's opportunities to leverage the other funds in the state to incentivize regional cooperation and investment in recycling services. For example, one of the things that's been mentioned is taking the state revenue sharing component that goes to municipalities called the Economic Vitality Incentive Program and incorporate recycling as one of the metrics used to award money to municipalities through that particular revenue sharing mechanism. A couple other things that are perhaps more long-term, and I'll talk about those in a little bit more context in a minute, would be the Governor's Council on Recycling and a Governor's Summit on Recycling. And those would be 2 venues at which the longer-term needs of this recycling in the state can be discussed and solutions can be established. There's certainly a lot of consensus on many of these short-term measures, measurement, education, the need for the state to provide leadership. There's certain other bigger picture issues that there isn't as much consensus on, and those will take much more long-term efforts to really establish some of these best practices that the MRC has recommended. But to kind of put the executive budget and the proposed executive budget and the MDEQ's plan of action in the context of what the Michigan Recycling Coalition has proposed, we have this matrix that we've developed that gives us a snapshot of how the pieces of this puzzle fit together. So if you look in the far left-hand column, you'll see the Michigan Recycling Coalition best-in-class elements. These are those things that we adopted in 2010 and further expound upon in 2011 that we said are necessary for the state to have comprehensive recycling. Data collection and measurement is clearly one of them. You can't measure how well you're doing. You can't establish program efficacy. You can't monitor your progress towards goals if you're not collecting data. We simply don't do a good job of collecting recycling data in this state. Not to say we don't have data. Most of the data we have has been done more in a case study approach as opposed to more of a longitudinal approach. And I know Matt Flecker has gone to great lengths to get as much data as he can so that we have a good snapshot of where we are and where we need to be. But we don't collect data routinely like we do from other entities in the state, landfills, e-waste processors, the e-waste OEMs, the compost facilities are just a few examples of entities from which we gather data routinely, but we don't routinely gather data from material recovery facilities or municipal collection programs, and that's something that ought to change. The executive proposal specifically mentioned that, and the MDEQ plan of action specifically lists that as one of the first things that they want to undertake, so that's why we call this a short-term effort. And when I say short-term, I don't mean it's short in duration, but it's maybe a more proper way of describing it would be near-term, something that can begin to happen right away. Education and technical assistance, and those are in some sense two separate things. Education can be considered, the broad outreach campaign to let people know why they should recycle and how they should recycle. Technical assistance is a step beyond that, and to provide the technical expertise to local units, to private businesses, to those folks that need to learn what best practices are and how to deploy them in their local areas. Again, that's something that the executive budget includes and specifically mentions. And again, the MDEQ's plan of action specifically identifies that as one of those short-term or near-term activities that can and ought to take place right away. State policy administration and leadership. When we looked across this country at those states that were high-performing, that's one of the things that we consistently saw was a commitment to sustainability and a commitment to recycling. And that's something that we haven't always had here in Michigan. We've had specific individuals that have done a fantastic job in trying to show leadership in the state, but we haven't had a broad-based institutional framework that really emphasizes recycling and gives us that policy and administrative leadership. And that's something that we think is very important, and we're happy to say that that's something that is specifically mentioned in the executive budget. Particularly if you take that language about a commitment to sustaining recycling, which is the language that's used, and likewise in the plan of action from the MDEQ, it talks about directing resources to have a sustained leadership in this area. Community infrastructure and services. In the MRC report, what we specifically meant by this is that we went through and we identified what it really costs to have curbside recycling collection in communities across the state, in those communities that are of 10,000 in population or more, or 300 people per square mile or more. And then for those smaller communities, what it would cost on a per capita basis to have drop-off centers. And we came up with the cost to that. We looked at some of the practices across the state, and we did some data sampling, and we applied that to Michigan as a whole using census data, and we identified that it would cost nearly $70 million a year to have everybody have either curbside collection or have drop-off centers in their communities. And that may sound like a big number, but when you consider that the value of the commodities that we're wasting by throwing them in the landfill every year is about $500 million, that 70 million doesn't all of a sudden seem like very much. And when I say $500 million, that's the difference between the 15% that we're currently recycling in the state and the 50% that we ought to be recycling if we were simply to achieve our stated goal in our existing state solid waste policy. So that 35% improvement really represents $500 million worth of commodities that could be salvaged from the landfill and processed at our MRF, and that's before any additional value-added activity takes place with them. So that's before the paper mills get their hands on them, or the plastics processors, or the metals processors. That's just simply the value to the MRFs in this state. So that's really implied in the executive budget when he talks about improving access in all counties. And that's also something that's mentioned in the long-term plan of action that the MDEQ has put together. Now, it's probably important to recognize that there are discussions about how best to move counties and communities towards having access at a higher level. And what you see in some of the discussions that we have, that there's been the carrot approach that we've recommended, where you offer incentives, financial incentives, monies that municipalities could tap into when they reach these certain benchmark standards. And then there's the stick approach that's been suggested by others, that all waste haulers in the state must provide recycling service if they're providing trash services. And so that's something that can be worked out in the long term, how best to get us from where we are now to where we want to be. Market and economic development is another component that we recommend, and that's something that you see in high-performing states across the country. In our modeling, we looked at the Pennsylvania market recycling markets organization. They do a really good job of driving market development, economic development related to recycling. Other states have done similar things. We modeled our costs after the Pennsylvania approach. Now, that's not mentioned specifically in the executive proposal, but it is something that's referenced in the MDEQ long-term plan of action. So I think that's something that we'll see further discussed at the state level in the stakeholder groups and with the Governor's Council. There's also some opportunities. I think the MDEQ director talked about the opportunity to begin to direct some internal staff resources towards this type of activity sooner than later, and then begin to develop synergies with other organizations like the MEDC, so that we have some of these economic development activities surrounding recycling like we have had in other industries, manufacturing, biotech, film, so on and so forth, so that we can begin to grow the recycling economy in the Michigan consistent with what its potential is. And then lastly, we recommended that county planning needs to be boosted. We need to do more of it. You know, those of you that are county planners or familiar with county plans know that the state hasn't called for a county plan update in a number of years, even though the current law requires 5-year update cycles. That wasn't mentioned in the executive budget, but again, it's mentioned as a long-term opportunity in the MDEQ plan of action, and so that's again something that we think will get more conversation. I did note that in the director's comments, he mentioned county planning specifically, and so that's a little bit of a departure from some of the earlier conversations we had about getting started on data and collection and measurement, education, technical assistance, and leadership. And the county planning was mentioned more of as a long-term item, but perhaps that's something that can, you know, move up on the list of things that can be accomplished in the short term. And you know, maybe some of the other folks that are part of the audience today will have some thoughts and comments on that. The other thing that's probably worth mentioning is that when you look at some of the metrics that the DEQ is talked about in terms of access to residential recycling and measuring program performance and efficacy, want to increase it to 29 counties have access to residential recycling by 2015, 45 by 2016, and have all 83 counties have robust access to recycling by 2017. And the other metric that has been talked about is increasing participation to above the Great Lakes average by 2017. There's a recognition there that just simply having access isn't sufficient. You need to have participation, and so that's part of measurement data collection. And one of the ways, again, to drive participation is to have a robust outreach and education program across the state, and that's something that I think we're confident that we're going to see sooner than later. So that's the long and short of how we view both the executive budget proposal and the MDEQ's plan of action. Is that it's the first step in a process. It's the first investment in many years in staff and resources to begin to address the deficiencies that we have, and we're hopeful that the framework that's being established with the Summit on Recycling and the Governor's Council on Recycling will move us in the right direction to not just ensure the adequate implementation of these short-term measures, but the development and implementation of some of the longer-term measures as well. So, thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Mike. I would now like to open up the floor to Matt Flechter, who is the recycling coordinator for the state of Michigan, Department of Environmental Quality. Matt, do you have any comments that you want or clarifications you want to make in terms of the state's proposal on this?
I think that was an excellent summary. First, before we go any further, I think we should recognize Michigan Recycling Coalition for putting this together, this forum, getting everybody informed out there. I'm assuming on the attendees on this webinar are people on the ground doing the work that have been working on these issues for many years, and to see this type of progress and this leadership is very reassuring. Also, need to recognize Karen O'Brien. It's her birthday. Thank you for sharing your birthday on this call. The work that Mike talked about through the stakeholders and the recommendations, he characterized it very well, in that there are short-term and long-term goals to improving recycling in Michigan, recognizing that we need to address those issues first that are holding us back: the data collection, measurement, participation, access, along with market development, fitting in planning, and all of those topics need to be accomplished at some point. What we're working on with this proposal is the first bite of the apple, the first tasks that need to be taken care of. We heard time and time again, we need to have data collection and measurement. We need to know where we are so we know where we're going. We're going to be hitting the ground running on that very quickly, even quicker than with this budget recommendation. We're setting a course right now to gather that data and set up the infrastructure to do that. Technical assistance and education. We've heard that we need to have local programs that are knowledgeable about funding mechanisms, about how programs are evolving. We also have heard on the other level that we need to have an educated public about how and why to recycle. And we're going to be working on that right away as well. Mike talked about market development. That's been a big theme that's come out of the stakeholder work group, that we've got markets that are struggling and markets that are struggling because there isn't material available for them. So there's two different types of market development that we're going to be working on right away, and building those partners with MEDC and other partners in the state to accomplish those goals. I think this is a great step in the right direction. It's very reassuring to see the leadership that we've had from the state level to get us to where we are today, and the leadership from Michigan Recycling Coalition and other organizations. I think that I'm going to leave it there and then hold off. Maybe there are some questions at the end if there are a couple of minutes, and we can address them at that time. But thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Matt. I think it's really clear how much work the MRC has put in as a stakeholder in this group, because there are a lot of parallels between the MRC's call to action and recommendations and what the state has come up to. So I think a huge, congratulations to Karen and the hard work of all the folks of the MRC for moving that forward. If you could advance to the next slide, Karen. I just have one slide here, and this is kind of a teaser for our conference coming up. An example of what sort of economic benefits we're talking about. For those of you who don't know, Emmett County is in the northern part of the Lower Peninsula. We're very rural, and yet by utilizing all of the opportunities available to us, and I might add that one of the reasons we've been able to do what we do is because 25 years ago is the last time the state showed leadership, had grant funding, was encouraging recycling initiatives through the solid waste planning process, and we really jumped onto that bandwagon at the ideal time, benefited from that state leadership and resource availability, and it's allowed us to grow a program that is very convenient, cost-effective, and comprehensive. This is just a snapshot from 2011 showing significant cost savings in the avoided cost of disposal, as well as over $1 million in direct economic benefit to the county. So we really want to make a case that the more you improve recycling infrastructure and availability in your communities, the more we are keeping jobs and resources in Michigan. And I will be sharing a lot more information about steps counties and communities can take to do that at the conference. What I would like to do now is actually ask a couple questions. So this is a chance you get to vote. All of you out there who are on mute, here's a chance to put your stamp of yes or no. I just have 2 questions. And Karen, if you could activate the poll. Our first question, would this $1 million general fund appropriation benefit your community, business, or organization? This is a live poll. The poll is open. Please select one, yes or no. You heard what that appropriation would provide. There are also some added benefits in terms of incentives, grant offerings, and so forth. But as a whole, do you see this as being positive, that you can actually get some benefit for who you are representing today, community, business, organization? And we'll just give you a minute or so to click your yes or no. And let's see.
We still have people voting, Elisa.
Okay. We've got about 80% voted so far, so the last few of you that might have been detained for a moment, thank you for getting your votes in. We're up to 85% voted.
And I'll close the poll.
Okay, wonderful. So we are looking at 92% yes. Well, that is really encouraging, because I think that it is a huge opportunity for all of us, whether we're public or private sector, raising the bar on recycling. I feel will benefit us all. So thank you for your little vote of support. We have one more question, and this will be up on the screen. Are you willing to do at least one thing to secure this funding for recycling in Michigan? If you're not sure what you can do, but you're willing to do something, Karen is going to be our next speaker, and she has some ideas for you. But here's an opportunity to say, well, yeah, this would be a good thing, so I will, whatever it is, make the phone call, write the letter, talk to someone about it. We have a poll in progress. 70% have voted so far, and we'll give it just another minute, so select yes or no. And countdown, I'd say another 10 seconds. We've got 80% who have voted.
And I'll close the poll.
Thank you. And we are showing 95% yes. So thank you in advance for being willing to step up and help move this forward, because as you've already heard, it's not a done deal. It's just been recommended. And so I would next like to introduce our fearless leader, Karen O'Brien, Executive Director of the MRC, to talk about how we can all get involved. Thank you, Karen.
Hi, thanks everybody. I appreciate the birthday wishes, Matt. That was very kind. Yeah, we've been hard at work on bringing this issue to the fore, and it is bearing fruit for us. And it is important, I think, that we make our voices heard at this particular time in history, because we are making history, I like to think. So I want to encourage you. We have some immediate things that need to happen and some longer term things that need to happen. And when I say immediate, I mean the Senate subcommittee for the environmental quality appropriations will actually be meeting next Tuesday, March 11th. And then the House Environmental Quality Appropriations Subcommittee will be meeting on March 13th. So next week, the prime subcommittees that will be dealing with this appropriation will be discussing and deciding as to whether this is something that they will move forward to the Appropriations Committee. So very important time to do some key initial things. First of all, if you have a legislator who is either in that subcommittee, the Environmental Quality Appropriations Subcommittees of both the House and the Senate, it's time to meet with them. If you can't meet with them before the 11th or the 13th, then a phone call, a very quick and easy phone call to let them know how you feel about this governor's recommendation of funding is a very key thing. They need to hear from their constituents, but they also need to hear from recycling folks from throughout the state that this is an important issue to them. Email is another effective way to not only talk to your legislator, but also legislators that will be dealing with these issues. So immediately, those are some things you can do before the subcommittee then moves their recommendation through the appropriations to the general appropriations committees. While we don't know when that's going to happen, it's going to be important that you're following, and we'll provide, of course, information about this, how this legislation, how these bills will move through the system as that happens. It's a pretty nimble system and turns on a dime, so we'll let you know. But important to write, call, email, meet up with any of these appropriations committee members in general to let them know how you feel about recycling. So we believe that if things continue to progress forward, that this appropriation bill could be on the House and Senate floor maybe in June. It could be as early as May, and that you have quite a bit of time through Earth Day to really use this as an opportunity to not only bring your decision makers in your communities on board with this, but also to let your constituents know what's happening. So, meeting with your Board of Commissioners and letting them know what's happening so they can make their voices heard, meeting with community groups to let them know what's happening and they can make their voices heard. I think some really key things, of course, social media, newsletters, really just feel free to use the material that we provide to let everybody know what's going on, and that while this it may not be a huge appropriation and you may not see something immediate from them, that this is the beginning of a greater process, and communities will ultimately benefit from this work. I would encourage you to consider, if you have a facility or have a program that you can share, Earth Day is a great opportunity to invite decision makers and legislators to come see how recycling works. we've had many instances in Congress where Congress people are invited to, Michigan facilities or facilities all across the country, and those opportunities give our decision makers real intimate understanding of what this business is all about. And I think that there's no better opportunity to give them a much bigger picture idea as to the impact recycling can have than to inviting them. If you don't have a facility to show, talking to them directly in a meeting, I think, is a great way to move things forward. We will continue to put information out about the meetings that are happening, who the appropriate contacts are. In fact, after this session, we will follow up with all of you with a list of legislators and some important key dates to keep you on task. And a call will literally take you 30 seconds to make. So that will be very important to do. What I'd like to do right now is ask Matt Flechter if he could unmute himself and give any information that he knows about timing of things from the legislature perspective.
Thanks, Karen. It's anybody's guess how this is going to go, whether this is going to accelerate because of the election year time frame that the legislature's in. But we do know that on the 11th and the 13th, those subcommittees will be meeting. Having knowledgeable people there to answer questions and present the benefits of recycling would be worthwhile. Making sure that they have good information about how recycling works and how measurement, market development, outreach, education, access, all of those components that are laid out in the proposal, how they would affect you, what you need as local programs or businesses. As far as timing is concerned, I think that we're probably a little bit accelerated this year. You can guess that it will be. The past couple of years, they've gone pretty quickly through the budget process. It's gone are the days of waiting till September or October 1st even, or after, to have a final budget agreement. So I would say move pretty quickly if you're going to have any influence in this.
Okay, thank you, Matt, and thank you, Karen. I, for one, would like to say I think it would be worth taking that step in terms of getting formal support for this appropriation. I will be bringing a resolution of support to my county board, and then have that signed document from our local elected officials to send to the various legislators. And Karen, I appreciate the fact you'll be following up with an email to all of the attendees, letting us know who is most important to contact and by when those various meetings are happening. At this time, I would like to introduce Matt Violette. He is project manager at Chef Container, and he's going to share a little bit why you will not want to miss MRC's annual conference at the end of the month, and share a bit about part 2 of this March 4th session at which we will both be presenting. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you very much, Alyssa. Good afternoon. As Alyssa said, I am Matt Violette with Chef Container. We would like to just take a moment to make sure that if you have not already registered to attend this year's conference, that you take a moment and really consider what you're going to learn by being part of one of the MRC conferences. Each year we have key sessions where we really go through the nuts and bolts that are going on in the industry as it relates to this year, and looking forward 3, 5, 7, 10 years out, and trying to talk about how to help different municipalities, different manufacturers, different private entities develop recycling programs that not only talk about traditional single stream recyclings, but also go into some far categories such as RFD cards and large infrastructure recycling. So each time we have that, this year we're going to have a second part to this discussion, which is the March 4th into recycling as part of our conference. And at that, we're going to be really diving into education on what different service models are available for municipalities, what different service models are available within that funding, how to leverage your private partnerships with different haulers in the communities, and how to leverage some partnerships with your recycling centers within your communities. And we're really going to talk about what it takes to develop a recycling program and really drive that home into having a high-level participation, getting community buy-in. You know, these are things that we talk about on a regular basis at the MRC, but it's something that there are a lot of people that are either new into a resource recycling coordinator kind of position, or are just a township supervisor or a township board that's trying to learn more information about how they can make their community, you know, better off as it relates to recycling within the state. So there's lots of things to see when you come to the Coalition Conference this year. There's always a lot of vendors there on all different avenues of products and services to talk to you about what's going on in the state and how there's things that can help. For those of you who are involved in municipalities, you know, Karen and I both want to make sure that you understand that there is a large group at the MRC as the board of directors and support staff that are available to help on a municipality level to educate, you know, what's possible for your community. And we always encourage, you know, municipalities to reach out when they have questions, and, you know, we'll try to help them and point them in the right direction and partner them with the right people to have those conversations, you know, either in person or through phone conferences. So I just want to make sure, if you have not registered, that you go ahead and do so. This year is going to be an exciting year, and you know, don't miss out.
Fantastic. Thank you, Matt. So we're now moving into our question period, and we have all of our speakers available to respond to questions. I do have a couple showing here, and I will address them, but please go ahead if you have any questions for any of our presenters. Type them in now in your little question area, and I will send them forth. The first one is actually to me, stating they'd love to receive a copy of the resolution of support that I develop as a guide for her commissioners, asking if I could send that out. I will make that available to Karen, and she could send it out with her MRC email to all of the attendees. So thank you.
Elisa, this is Mike. Also, the Michigan Recycling Coalition Board of Directors has adopted a resolution in support of this as well. So I think Karen could probably make that available. That might also be something that local groups could build upon. And just a quick follow-up to Karen's point about contacting your legislators. I think it's important that we also contact our local legislators. You know, we don't want to just contact those folks on the appropriations subcommittees, and you can find out who those folks are by going to michiganlegislature.org, but also contact your local legislator, whether it's where you live or where you work or both, because both the House and Senate representatives from your home district are going to have a say on this at some point in the process, and so it's important that you know, we take that opportunity to contact everybody we can.
All right, thank you, Mike. So this question, I believe, would be for Matt Flechter. Question regarding the measurement and recycling rates. The question is, do recycling rates take into account those recyclable materials that never enter the municipal waste stream, like cardboard collected, baled, and transported by various supermarket and big box retail chains? So as part of the state's measurement, will there be an attempt made to capture that, or is that not part of these recycling rates that will be measured?
It's a good question. There are different ways to measure recycling. The common way that you heard, a 15% number that the director mentioned, that number is looking at municipal solid waste, so anything that meets the definition of municipal solid waste. So from commercial and residential, the commercial and residential sector, and that is processed at a materials recovery facility, whether in state or out of state. So it doesn't include something like waste minimization avoidance, but it is actually tons recycled divided by the amount of waste generated. So that's amount recycled plus the amount disposed is the amount generated. And that's the standard method for measuring recycling. And when you see across BioCycle as other states, that's where that recycling number is coming from. So to answer your specific question about baled cardboard from the commercial sector, that would be included, and that would be collected through contacting the materials recovery facilities and seeing what their throughput is of material. That said, there's a pretty robust dialogue nationally about whether a recycling rate is ultimately the best way to measure performance, and there are other ways to measure performance. We don't want to hang our hat just on that. We want to look at total landfill rates of disposal so we can account for that minimization of waste. We want to look across utilization. It's not just about the amount recycled, but we want to include composting and anaerobic digestion and anaerobic digesters as utilization, so we can calculate that. So yes, your question, a simple question, but maybe a complicated answer.
Great, thank you, Matt. The next question is for Karen. Will this presentation be sent to us?
I think we can certainly make that available. So yep, I will put that in the follow-up email as well.
Terrific. Matt, would that 15% recycling rate take into account the material that goes from a MRF to a waste-to-energy plant? Now we're getting into the difference between recycling and waste utilization. One of my favorite topics. Matt?
The simple answer to that question is no. That does not meet the definition of recycling. So if we're going to calculate a recycling rate, it would be material that is sent on to another product. So waste to energy, landfill gas, other types of utilization would not be included in a recycling rate. And that's why it's so important that we have different metrics so we're not confusing the numbers. So and that's also nationally the dialogue. You've got some states that are including auto bodies in the recycling rate, and other states don't. And so it's very difficult to compare. And we need to have a number of metrics so that we can track over time what our recycling rate is, what our utilization rate is, and then also be able to look using the solid waste policy that looks at the highest and best use of waste, making sure that we can make informed choices.
Terrific. Okay, I have a question for Matt. I know that there's quite a bit of uncertainty as to how quickly the appropriations process and the budget process will move through the legislature. But since I'm an eternal optimist, I would love to hear your best case scenario. Say that the budget goes through by early summer. What sort of time frame might we anticipate in these various action areas that were brought up? And I'm particularly interested in when data measurement might start, when the 3 FTE might be hired, and when you will look at reopening the solid waste planning process with the counties.
All right. Well, I am also the eternal optimist. But I don't want to, overpromise any action. We are really hitting the ground running. What this has done is it's given us the tools to discuss these issues on multiple different levels. It's given us the entree into working with other departments, with stakeholders, and people are really hooking their car onto this train because it seems to be going somewhere. So that's accelerating our time frame on a number of fronts, and specifically the measurement front. We're looking at starting the measurement process right away, getting a web-based system for managing the data, and entering into a contract to collect the data from facilities, looking at access, participation, and then also looking at some waste data analysis. That process is going to start over it'll be before summer, it'll be this spring. We're going to get going on that. Like was said, we're really putting a lot of effort into this and pulling staff resources into working on these issues so that we're all pulling in the same direction. As far as solid waste planning, I think that was the other thing you said, measurement, and was there one more other than planning?
The hiring of the 3 FTE.
Okay. That specifically, we wouldn't be able to do that unless the money is available, and that would be October 1st. So we're going to be putting together the process to get those positions in place, and those 3 positions really are going to work on market development, measurement, and education and outreach. Those are going to be their main focus. That said, there's also a lot of work that has to be done on those other topics, specifically solid waste planning. We're looking at moving that forward. However, if you recall, there was quite a lot of dialogue about what the solid waste process needs to be and how it needs to be changed. We did a lot of work. We had proposals. We made it all into the legislature, but they didn't act on those changes. So we're back to the drawing board on that. So that's going to be another stakeholder-driven process that's going to have to happen. So that sets us on a time frame a little bit slower. We need to make sure we get it right, make sure the plans are serving their purpose as intended, and also using the tool of solid waste planning to drive these other topics forward. So that's a little bit up in the air as far as how the timing is going to go for that.
Got it. Terrific. I got a couple others. We are closing it on the end of our hour, but I will field these quickly. The first one to Matt. How will we account for waste being brought to areas outside of Michigan?
So waste or recycling? So it's like, so we need a waste generated number. That's an important number to come up with to track. So we would be looking at working with partner states to look and see how much waste is exported, but more importantly, making sure that we use our solid waste landfill receipt report to be able to remove the waste that's coming in from out of state, out of that denominator of the recycling rate equation. As far as recycling, some waste, some recycling does end up going directly to market from out of state collection points, and that's where it gets very complicated because ideally, you just go to every materials recovery facility in Michigan and get a total number of throughput tons. But we do know that some material is sent out of state, so we're going to need to work to gather that information from those facilities that are out of state.
Okay. And very last one, Karen, if you could take this. Under the impression that a work group of industry stakeholders was already working on defining metrics.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to understand that question.
Yeah, I am not sure.
Well, you know,
I can jump in there.
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I think maybe that could be the subcommittee. The process where this the proposed plan of action came from, we had broad stakeholder work groups, and there were 3 subcommittees that their recommendations found their way, pieces of their recommendations, since this recommendation doesn't do everything, it just does parts of it. Piece of the recommendations ended up in the final proposal. And one of those subcommittees was a measurement and goals subcommittee. And that the measurement and goals subcommittee made some recommendations about how we should track recycling, who should do it, and then also to highlight something that specifically that came out of that subcommittee. Those subcommittee recommendations was that recognition that access is important, but you can't track just access, you can't track just tonnage, you have to look at participation and making sure we're continually driving increased participation in existing programs as well as programs that are going to be built.
Terrific. Thank you, Matt. We have used up our available time. I just want to say on behalf of the MRC, a thank you to Lisa Ruggiero from the NRC for hosting our webinar today, Karen O'Brien, Mike Sapo, Matt Violette, and Matt Flechter, all for presenting. And I want to finish with a happy birthday to Karen and a reminder for everyone to please register for the annual conference coming up April 29th through May 1st, and then attend the second half of this session where we'll get into a lot more detail, a lot of cool stuff coming up on the Wednesday of that conference. So again, thank you and wish you all well.
Bye-bye.